Well, the Ark of the Covenant is fascinating because it's the most important ritual object that Judaism has ever had.
Somewhere beneath the ancient hills of Judea, a small team of researchers following clues in a manuscript nobody had fully translated found something on their ground-penetrating radar that stopped everyone in the room cold. 30 feet down, a chamber.
The Temple Mount in Jerusalem has never been excavated, but an illegal construction project 20 years ago opened the door to some major discoveries.
Inside the chamber, something that matched a description written 3,000 years ago in almost every specific detail. What happened next is the part that does not have a clean explanation.
The Ark is first introduced scripturally in the book of Exodus, where God gives Moses instructions to build an ark for carrying the Ten Commandments.
The find. The team had been working from a manuscript that had circulated in academic circles for years without generating serious excavation interest. The document was old, written in a form of Hebrew that specialists dated to the Second Temple period, and it described the location of a hidden chamber in the Judean hills using astronomical and geographical markers that the team had spent months cross-referencing against modern survey data. Most researchers who had looked at the manuscript treated it as symbolic, the kind of text that describes spiritual truths using the language of physical location. The team that followed it literally found a chamber. The ground-penetrating radar showed the space clearly at around 30 feet below the surface. The shape was consistent, and the floor appeared level, suggesting a built structure rather than a natural formation. When they broke through the access point and lowered cameras, what the cameras showed stopped the excavation for 2 days, while the team tried to process what they were looking at. A chest, gold-covered. The dimensions matched the biblical description in Exodus to within inches. A lid. 2 figures on the lid facing each other, their wings extended inward over the lid's surface. The biblical text describes the lid of the Ark of the Covenant as the mercy seat.
According to some scholars, such a relic could actually exist. The Ark of the Covenant.
With 2 cherubim with wings spread toward each other above it. The description was precise. What the cameras showed was precise. The match between the two was closer than anyone on the team had planned for when they started the excavation. Around the chest, on the floor of the chamber, bones. Scorch marks on the walls in patterns that radiated outward from the chest's location. Old bones, not fresh, but positioned in ways that did not suggest peaceful rest. And when the team sent people down to get closer, the cameras failed. Not malfunctioned in the way electronics sometimes malfunction in underground environments. Failed completely, screens going dark at a distance from the chest that was consistent across every piece of equipment brought into the chamber. The team brought in backup electronics. Those failed too.
The Babylonians invaded Jerusalem and sacked Solomon's temple.
When the Temple of Solomon was destroyed in 586 BCE, all the temple treasures were lost to history.
What the science found. When the team brought in scientists to examine the site and what was in it, what the scientific instruments produced was as difficult to explain as what the cameras had shown. X-ray equipment brought to examine the chest without requiring physical contact with it failed to produce usable images. The materials the chest appeared to be made from, examined through spectral analysis from a distance, did not match any known wood species for the inner construction or any identified alloy for the gold covering. The wood, based on its visible properties and the analysis that could be conducted without touching it, most closely resembled acacia, which is what the biblical text specifies. But the precise analysis that would confirm this could not be completed because the instruments kept failing. The electromagnetic field was the finding that the scientists struggled most to characterize. Sensitive measuring equipment detected a rhythmic pulse coming from the chest, a regular fluctuation in the electromagnetic field that did not correspond to any natural source the team could identify. The pulse was not constant. It varied in a pattern that the team's instruments recorded before those instruments also failed, and the pattern in the brief recording that survived did not match any known natural or manufactured electromagnetic signature. The effects on the people who got closest to the chamber were documented carefully by team members who stayed further back. Researchers who spent extended time in the chamber reported unusually vivid and disturbing dreams in the nights following their exposure. Several reported nosebleeds that started during or immediately after chamber visits. 2 reported periods of temporary vision disturbance that resolved within days but were severe enough while they lasted to prevent normal functioning. The team documented all of this. They also noted that the symptoms were consistent with what the biblical text describes happening to people who approached the Ark without the proper preparation.
If the Ark of the Covenant had been brought to Rome, unique object, which remember was supposed to have awesome power, apart from the fact that it was beautiful to look at and that God was supposed to live within those 2 cherubim on the top.
The cover-up. Within 72 hours of the scientific team's first full examination of the chamber, military vehicles arrived at the site without warning. There had been no prior notification, no coordination with the expedition leadership, and no request for the team's preliminary findings. The convoy appeared just after dawn, when visibility was still thin and the desert air carried a cold, metallic dryness that made sound travel farther than expected. Soldiers established a secure perimeter with practiced efficiency, placing barriers around the excavation entrance and sealing all access routes leading into the dig site. Communication equipment was set up on elevated ground, and civilian personnel were instructed to remain beyond a newly defined boundary line. The scientific team, still wearing field gear and dust-covered gloves from their morning shift, was kept outside the perimeter and allowed no further access. From that distance, they watched as specialized equipment was unloaded from reinforced transport vehicles. Among it was a lead-lined containment container, unusually large and clearly designed for high-risk transport. The team noted that the equipment appeared not improvised, but pre-selected for a very specific purpose, suggesting that whatever was about to be removed had been anticipated long before the team's formal report could have circulated through any standard administrative channel. Under heavy supervision, the chest recovered from the chamber was carefully lifted and placed into the lead-lined container. The operation was conducted with minimal verbal communication, relying instead on hand signals and pre-assigned roles. Once secured, the container was sealed and escorted away from the chamber by armed personnel. Immediately afterward, the scientific team was separated. Each member was transported individually to an undisclosed secure facility. Over the following days, they underwent structured questioning sessions. The inquiries were consistent across all individuals who had been informed about the excavation prior to the discovery.
That it is built according to the same plan that the temple in Jerusalem, the Solomonic temple, was built. What the Bible is telling us, we can now see physically in archaeology.
What documentation had been shared outside the team, and whether any digital records, field notes, or communications had been duplicated or transmitted externally. Following the interrogations, each team member was presented with a comprehensive non-disclosure agreement. The document was extensive and unusually broad in scope, covering every aspect of the excavation, the chamber, the chest, and all observational data, both recorded and recalled. The language extended beyond direct disclosure, explicitly including indirect references, symbolic descriptions, and any future academic interpretation that could reasonably be traced back to the findings. Every member of the team signed. One member did not remain silent. Daniel Knox, a technician responsible for monitoring electromagnetic fluctuations during the excavation, uploaded a video online approximately 3 weeks after signing his agreement. The recording was short and deliberately composed. Knox appeared composed, speaking in a controlled tone, avoiding identifiable references to exact coordinates or institutional affiliations. He described anomalous equipment failures, an intense electromagnetic disturbance recorded at the chamber's threshold, and the presence of a sealed chest that matched descriptions found in ancient biblical texts. In the video, Knox acknowledged explicitly that he was in violation of a legally binding agreement. He stated that, in his view, the potential public significance of the discovery outweighed the personal and legal consequences he was accepting. He also claimed he was recording and uploading the message from a location he had not disclosed to anyone. The video remained online for approximately 6 hours before being removed from every platform on which it had appeared. Shortly thereafter, Knox's phone went unanswered and diverted directly to voicemail. When colleagues and acquaintances visited his apartment, they found it empty, with no indication of forced entry or struggle. As of the last available reports, Daniel Knox has not been seen or heard from again.
The Temple Mount itself has never been excavated, but over the past century, archaeologists have been exploring the areas around it, and they've discovered a wealth of artifacts that tell the story of the Second Temple.
The manuscript and the Temple Mount. The manuscript the team had been working from prior to the excavation did not describe a single site, but a network of them arranged in a deliberate sequence. The chamber in the Judean hills, where the chest was ultimately recovered, was presented in the text as only the first verified location. It was framed less as a destination and more as an entry point, an initial repository designed to confirm the accuracy of the manuscript's internal mapping system. The second location referenced in the document was significantly more sensitive and far more difficult to investigate. It was described as being beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, widely considered the most politically and religiously contested archaeological site on Earth. Direct excavation in the area has been effectively impossible for decades due to overlapping religious authority, international diplomatic pressure, and the presence of the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Dome of the Rock directly above the subsurface zones of interest. Before his disappearance, Daniel Knox reportedly succeeded in decoding a section of the manuscript that referred explicitly to this second site. He shared his translated notes with a journalist named David Lewin, who retained copies of the material. In those notes, Knox outlined a hypothesized chamber beneath the Temple Mount and attempted to correlate its described position with previously collected subsurface survey data from the region. That data originated from a limited and largely unacknowledged scanning initiative carried out years earlier by a small research group with access to underground imaging systems. According to Knox's reconstruction, those scans revealed an unusual subsurface anomaly, a concentrated zone of magnetic radiation that did not correspond to any known geological formation, fault line, or mineral deposit.
It could also unleash incredible power.
Its structure appeared unusually coherent, as though the field itself had been shaped or contained rather than naturally occurring. The anomaly's coordinates aligned closely with the manuscript's description of where a second object was said to rest. The scanning project itself was never formally published or peer-reviewed. The team responsible for it dissolved shortly after completing their fieldwork, and the raw data sets were never deposited in any public or institutional archive. As a result, Knox's notes remain one of the only surviving references to the findings, and there is no independent way to confirm or refute their interpretation without access to the original data. What can be corroborated, however, is more limited but still significant in context. The location described in the manuscript corresponds to a subsurface zone beneath the Temple Mount that has been restricted from archaeological investigation since the 1970s. During that period, a survey team reportedly identified previously undocumented tunnel systems during restricted subsurface work conducted under controlled conditions. Shortly after the discovery, access to the area was abruptly revoked by Israeli authorities, and subsequent excavation requests were denied without public explanation. Since then, the region has remained effectively closed to systematic scientific inquiry, existing in a persistent state of controlled inaccessibility where historical research, political sensitivity, and religious authority intersect in ways that prevent verification, yet do not eliminate speculation about what may lie beneath.
One of our reliable sources told us that there's this ancient, mysterious tunnel running 40 feet underground the old city of Jerusalem.
The historical trails. The search for the Ark of the Covenant has produced a range of competing theories spread across different research traditions, and each of them has enough supporting evidence to take seriously, and enough gaps to leave the question genuinely open. In a European museum, a metal plate that had been catalogued as a decorative artifact from the Roman period was re-examined by an independent researcher and identified as a map. The map showed a series of sealed tunnels beneath Jerusalem, with markers indicating specific distances and directions from identifiable surface features. The research was published in a small journal. The museum subsequently moved the plate to an off-display storage facility. The researcher who published the analysis lost her academic position 6 months later over what the institution described as unrelated matters. The Ethiopian tradition is the most sustained and most institutionally embedded of the competing claims.
Long before it was the religion of the Roman Empire, it was the religion here in Ethiopia. Ethiopia was the first Christian kingdom in the world.
The Ethiopian Orthodox Church maintains that the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Ethiopia by Menelik, the son born to Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, during a visit Menelik made to Jerusalem as a young man. The Ark is said to have been kept ever since in a chapel adjacent to the Church of Our Lady Mary of Zion in Aksum, Ethiopia. The chapel has a single guardian monk who is the only person allowed to enter it, chosen for life and replaced at death. The guardian never leaves the chapel grounds. When journalists and researchers have asked to see what is inside, the guardian's response is consistent. The Ark is there. It cannot be shown to anyone, and that is the end of the conversation. No one who has entered the chapel in the modern period has come out to describe what is inside. The Ethiopian Church has maintained this position across every political upheaval, every invasion, and every change of government the country has experienced over 2,000 years. A document recovered from a British wartime archive describes a mission conducted in the early 1940s by a small Allied team sent to investigate reports of unusual activity in the Sinai Peninsula. The mission report, written by an archaeologist attached to the team named Dr. Emery Foster, was classified on its return and has never been officially declassified. A partial photocopy of the report circulates in research circles. The legible portions describe Foster examining a sealed underground chamber in the Sinai and concluding that it had been used for the storage of an object consistent with the biblical description of the Ark.
It has long been believed that the Ark of the Covenant had some type of electromagnetic energy, a power that is not supernatural or spiritual in nature, but very much technological.
The chamber, Foster wrote, was empty. He included a note about the age of the chamber's construction and a reference to evidence suggesting the object had been moved relatively recently in archaeological terms. Foster's published academic work after the war made no reference to the Sinai mission. He died in 1961. His personal papers were donated to a university archive and catalogued. The inventory of those papers includes a reference to a sealed folder marked Sinai 1968, a date that is 27 years after the mission and 7 years after Foster's death, which is impossible unless the folder was added to the collection after his death by someone else.
People have often wondered what really did happen to the Ark.
A journalist named David Lewin, following up on the Knox material, found the reference to the Sinai 1968 folder in the University Archive inventory and requested access to it. He was told the folder had been removed from the collection for conservation purposes. When he asked when it would be returned and available for viewing, the archive staff told him the conservation process had no specified end date. Inside the folder, according to the inventory description before it was removed, was a single Polaroid photograph labeled Sinai, 1968.
The Ark of the Covenant is real, and we have a location for it. Sounds like something out of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark, describing a gold-covered chest guarded by powerful beings in an underground Middle Eastern chamber.
Ron Wyatt's claim. In 1982, a man named Ron Wyatt made a claim that the religious and archaeological establishment has spent 40 years trying to decide how to classify. Wyatt was not a professional archaeologist. He was a nurse with a deep interest in biblical archaeology who had spent years conducting his own excavations at sites connected to the Old and New Testaments. In 1982, working in tunnels beneath Jerusalem in an area near the traditional site of the crucifixion, he reported finding a chamber. In the chamber, he reported, was the Ark of the Covenant. Wyatt's account of what he found is specific in ways that are both compelling and impossible to independently verify. He described crucifixion post holes cut into the rock at the site above the chamber, holes that matched the dimensions for the posts used in Roman execution. He described a crack in the bedrock running from the surface down through the roof of the chamber, a crack consistent with what seismic activity would produce and consistent with what the Gospel accounts describe happening at the moment of the crucifixion. Through this crack, Wyatt said, a dark substance had dripped onto the lid of the ark, onto what the Bible calls the mercy seat, where the high priest would sprinkle blood during the Day of Atonement ritual. Wyatt said he had the substance tested and that it tested as dried blood. He said the blood had only 23 chromosomes, which he interpreted as the biological signature of a being without a human father. He took photographs. The photographs did not develop. He took video. The video showed nothing useful when reviewed.
The Ark of the Covenant represents the giving of the Torah at Sinai from God. It's the holiest object that ever existed in the Jewish tradition.
He reported that during the time he spent in the chamber, he encountered 4 beings he described as angels, who told him the Ark would not be revealed to the public until a future divinely chosen time. The response from the archaeological community was complete rejection. Professional archaeologists noted that Wyatt had no credentials, no site documentation meeting any accepted standard, no reproducible evidence, and no witnesses to the discovery itself. His own church, the Seventh-day Adventist denomination, formally distanced itself from his claims. Scientists who reviewed his accounts pointed out methodological problems with every specific claim he made. But Wyatt's story does not go away. The specific details he described, the crucifixion post holes, the crack in the bedrock, the substance on the mercy seat, are either an elaborate fabrication or a description of something that connects the site of the crucifixion to the location of the ark in a way that the biblical text appears to anticipate. The mercy seat was the location where blood was sprinkled during the Day of Atonement ritual as an act of atonement for the nation's sins. If the crucifixion happened directly above the ark, the blood dripping through the crack onto the mercy seat would be the thing that the entire temple ritual had been pointing toward for centuries. Whether Wyatt found something real or constructed an elaborate and sincere delusion remains unanswered. What is answered is that his account fits a theological pattern so precisely that the fit itself is worth examining.
The covenant and the ark and all these bizarre stories that have lasted throughout history, and the real evidence that there was really sophisticated societies that lived thousands and thousands of years ago.
The White Prophecy. In 1901, a religious writer named Ellen G. White, one of the founders of the Seventh-day Adventist movement, published a statement about the Ark of the Covenant. She wrote that at a specific future time, chosen by divine providence, the Ark would be brought out of its hiding place and shown to the world. She described this as an event that would happen when the world was ready to receive what it would reveal. Wyatt read this statement as confirmation of his discovery. If the Ark was real and had been found, and if the angels who appeared to him had told him it would not be publicly revealed until the appointed time, then the fact that his photographs failed and his video was useless fit the pattern White had described. The discovery was real. The revelation was not yet permitted. The same church that produced White formally rejected Wyatt's claims. The theological symmetry between the prophecy and the claimed discovery was not enough to overcome the evidentiary problems with the claim itself. The denomination's position was that Wyatt's account was sincere but mistaken, and that whatever he found or did not find in those tunnels, it was not the Ark. White's statement remains in the Church's historical record. The time she described as the divinely chosen moment for the revelation has not been specified. The Ark, if it exists in a retrievable form anywhere, has not been shown to the world. Whether the disclosure sequence she described is underway in events that are currently unfolding, or whether her statement was metaphorical rather than predictive, is a question that the evidence available does not settle in either direction.
The ark was covered by this gold lid called the mercy seat. Now, it's also known as the throne of God, mainly because we have a passage in 1 Samuel 4:4 that mentions how God is enthroned between the cherubim.
What the Ark was. The biblical description of the Ark of the Covenant is specific enough to produce a detailed blueprint, a chest approximately 4 feet long and 2.5 feet wide and deep, constructed from acacia wood and covered inside and out with pure gold. A lid of solid gold called the mercy seat, with 2 cherubim of hammered gold at each end, facing each other with their wings spread toward each other above it. 4 gold rings attached to the base, 2 on each side, through which 2 carrying poles of gold-covered acacia wood were inserted permanently because the ark was never to be set down on the ground, and anyone who touched it directly could be killed. Inside the chest, 3 objects. The tablets of the covenant, the stone tablets on which the 10 commandments were written at Sinai. A jar of manna, the substance that had sustained Israel through 40 years in the wilderness. Aaron's rod, the staff of the first high priest that had budded overnight in a miraculous confirmation of his priestly calling. The ark was the centerpiece of the tabernacle and later the temple. It was kept in the innermost room, the Holy of Holies, behind a thick curtain that no one except the high priest was permitted to enter, and the high priest only once a year on the Day of Atonement. The cloud that represented the divine presence was said to rest between the 2 cherubim above the mercy seat. The ark was the point where the divine and human met, and the protocols around approaching it were so strict that touching it even accidentally, as the biblical account of Uzzah shows, resulted in immediate death. After the Babylonian conquest of Jerusalem in 586 BCE and the destruction of the First Temple, the ark disappears from the historical record. It is not mentioned in the account of items taken to Babylon. It is not included in the list of items returned when the exiles came back. It simply stops appearing in the narrative. The theories about where it went have produced a literature of their own. Hidden beneath the Temple Mount before the Babylonian army arrived, carried to Mount Nebo by Jeremiah, taken to Ethiopia by Menelik, carried to Rome, taken to Ireland by the prophet's daughter, buried somewhere in the Judean wilderness. Each theory has supporting evidence, and each theory has gaps. The only thing every serious researcher agrees on is that the ark went somewhere. It was too important and too carefully maintained for it to simply have been destroyed or lost without any record of what happened to it. Something that occupied the center of a nation's religious life for centuries does not vanish without someone knowing where it went.
The major part of this structure is still hidden, needs to be excavated. What we have in hand is less than a quarter, I would say really much less.
Recent finds. In the excavations at the Givati parking lot site near the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, archaeologists working under the supervision of the Israel Antiquities Authority unearthed a gold ring dating to approximately 2,300 years ago. The ring was recovered from a layer consistent with the late Second Temple period, the same period when the ark would have been in the temple if it had not been removed or hidden earlier. The ring itself is not evidence of the ark. A piece of jewelry, however old and however beautifully made, is not a vessel containing the tablets of the law and Aaron's rod. But the proximity of the find to the Temple Mount complex and the date of the layer it came from reminded researchers following the ark question of something consistently overlooked in the popular treatment of the subject. The area around the Temple Mount has not been fully excavated. The underground systems beneath the old city of Jerusalem have been mapped partially and explored selectively, and the portions that have been closed to investigation have been closed for reasons that are political and religious rather than archaeological. Whatever is beneath the Temple Mount in the areas that have not been examined has not been examined. That is a simple factual statement, and it is a statement that sits at the center of every Ark of the Covenant theory that places the object in or near Jerusalem. The evidence for a hidden chamber in that location comes from multiple independent sources, including the covert scanning that Knox referenced in his notes, the tunnel systems that survey teams found and were then blocked from following, and the manuscript that started the entire excavation in the Judean hills. None of this evidence is proof. All of it points in the same direction. The Ark and the Empty Tomb. The theological pattern that connects the Ark of the Covenant to the resurrection of Jesus is one of the most interesting details in the entire history of this subject, and it is one that most people who follow either the archaeological or the theological trail separately never encounter because it requires holding both at the same time. When Mary Magdalene and the other women came to the tomb on the morning of the resurrection and looked inside, the Gospel of John describes what they saw: the burial cloths lying there, and at the head and at the feet, 2 angels in white, 2 figures positioned at the head and the feet of the place where Jesus had been lying, 1 at each end. The mercy seat of the Ark of the Covenant had 2 cherubim, 1 at each end, their wings spread toward each other above the place where the blood was sprinkled and where the divine presence rested. 2 figures, 1 at each end, above the place of the central act. The parallel is exact, and it does not appear to be accidental. The 3 objects inside the ark were manna from the wilderness, the bread that came down from heaven to sustain life, a rod that budded from apparent death, demonstrating life coming from something that appeared finished, and the tablets of the law, the Word of God, written in stone. The theological tradition that reads the ark as pointing forward to Jesus sees these 3 objects as previews: the bread of life, the resurrection from the dead, and the Word made flesh. 3 objects inside the container, 3 days in the tomb, 2 angels at each end. Whether the ark is a physical object sitting in a chamber somewhere waiting to be found, or a theological symbol whose meaning has been fulfilled and whose physical location is therefore less important than its spiritual significance, the 2 readings are not mutually exclusive. The physical and the theological can both be true simultaneously. An object can be real and hidden and also point beyond itself to something even more significant than its own existence. The search for the ark has always been understood as a search for the place where the divine and human meet. The resurrection account describes exactly that. The question of whether those 2 things are related, whether the physical object and the theological reality are connected in a way that was designed rather than coincidental, is the question the evidence in this subject keeps producing without fully answering. A chamber 30 feet down, electronics failing at a consistent distance, an electromagnetic pulse with no known source. A technician who posted one video and vanished. Manuscripts, scanning data, hidden folders, and a Polaroid from a date that should not exist. The evidence does not settle the question. It deepens it. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next.